from Arizona.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend remarks and include any extraneous material of the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady from Arizona has as much time as she wishes to use.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 1302, the Terrorist and Foreign Fighter Travel Exercise Act. This legislation furthers the efforts that I and several of my colleagues on the House Homeland Security Committee engaged in last Congress as members of the bipartisan task force on combating terrorist and foreign fighter travel. For 6 months, our task force investigated our security vulnerabilities and the threat posed by ISIS. Our work produced 32 key findings and over 50 recommendations to make Americans safer. In our findings, the task force found that the growing complexity and changing nature of the foreign fighter phenomena may be creating unseen gaps in our defenses, yet it has been years since any large-scale stress test has been conducted on U.S. government protection and prevention programs against terrorist travel. The last major government exercise on terrorist travel occurred in 2009, when the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, conducted an exercise focused on the aftermath of a national terrorist event outside of the United States and how to prevent subsequent efforts by terrorists to enter the United States and carry out additional attacks. The objective of the exercise was to determine how government agencies at all levels would respond in such an environment. However, the threat environment has changed considerably, and relying on information gathered during an exercise that took place nearly a decade ago is simply unacceptable and puts American lives at risk. The exercise conducted in 2009 also focused primarily on terrorists attempting to infiltrate the United States. However, our task force found that officials today should be just as concerned about Americans leaving the country to train overseas with terrorist groups as foreign fighters and then come back. The ability of these hardened fighters to return to the United States is a legitimate security threat to the homeland. Catching and looking to join the ranks and train with ISIS and other terrorist organizations prior to their initial departure is equally important and should be a goal for law enforcement as well. As such, H.R. 1302 would require that the executive branch conduct an exercise to evaluate the nation's preparedness against all phases of foreign fighter planning and travel. Carrying out such a test would be beneficial in understanding how partners at all levels of government and abroad are currently responding to these scenarios. We must take decisive action to defeat the threat of ISIS and other terrorist organizations. The findings of the exercise required by this legislation will identify weaknesses at home and abroad that may be exploited by terrorists and foreign fighters, particularly to infiltrate the United States to conduct attacks. These findings will also be provided to Congress and federal law enforcement and intelligence officials to provide information on how we can best address these weaknesses. Passage of the Terrorist and Foreign Fighter Travel Exercise Act today represents continued action by this body to fight against ISIS and ensure we keep Americans safe. I urge all members to join me in supporting this common-sense, bipartisan bill. Before I close, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record an exchange between the chairman of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the chairman on the Committee of Homeland Security.
Without objection, so ordered.
I urge all members to join me in supporting this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.